Memories from Siberia. Introduction. In June 1941, it had been 1 year since the Soviet Union invaded Latvia. Harry Leges would turn 10 years old in July, and he was the oldest of his brothers and sister. His brother Henins was 6, sister Zenta was almost 4, and their youngest brother John had just turned 2 in May. The Leges family lived in Skrunda, a town in southwestern Latvia. His parents, Carl and Emily, owned a small clothing store, which was probably the reason they and their 4 children were deported to Siberia on June 14, 1941. I have adapted this from Hari's memories, which were recorded by Elmars Henins and translated into English by Albert Henins, Iavars Henins, and Emant Sachs. This story is told from Hari's perspective. Deportation.
My family lived near the Venter River, and I had gone there that morning to fish. When I came home, our little kitchen was full of people. I recognized one of them, but the others were strangers and spoke in a foreign language. They asked where my father was, and my mother answered that he had gone to Riga or Liepāja to shop. They left, but returned 4 hours later, and were now issuing orders. They said that my family must travel. We would be going very far, so we must take clothes and food. Unfortunately, there was no bread in our home, and the shops were closed. But at Uncle Oscar's house, they had baked bread. My mother sent me there, and they gave me 2 large loaves of bread. Meanwhile, Mother was packing clothes in suitcases, but in a panic she collected only summer clothing. She forgot to pack winter clothing. As the oldest and strongest son, I carried the bags, while my mother carried my little brother John. We were all taken to the Skrunda train station in an open truck and were ordered to enter a freight car. That night we cried, understanding that something worse and more dreadful was going to happen. My mother was reluctant to go without our father, and she asked where he was. The next day was Sunday, the weather was sunny, and more people were brought to the train station. In our train car, people were pushed inside and packed like sardines. Since I was a little boy, I was able to crawl to the window of the train car. I looked and saw that a car was passing by. I saw our father sitting in the back seat between 2 soldiers. I shouted as loudly as I could, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy!" He broke away from the soldiers, ran to the train car, opened the door and climbed in. The soldiers grabbed my father's feet and pulled him to the ground. Father was strong. He kicked a soldier in the face very hard. I saw that the soldier's jaw was hanging down and that his face had started to bleed. While the other soldiers were distracted helping that soldier, Father talked to Mother. She gave him a half a loaf of bread. He kissed us all very lovingly. Then the soldiers hauled him away. My last memory of him was that he was dressed in a suit, with a straw hat on his head and sandals on his feet. This was the last time we saw him.
Heat and thirst.
The weather was hot. In the train car were 2 buckets of water from which everyone drank. We didn't dare to wash. The water ran out very quickly, but we were able to get a refill when the locomotive stopped to pick up water. Soldiers released 2 people with a container from a train car. The water carriers from the next train car were released only after the previous car had received their water. Unfortunately, not everyone in the train cars was able to get water. It was very hot and stuffy at night, and the water was consumed quickly. Many people fainted. Those who were able would cry out for water, but no one helped. In the train car, an old man from Ranki named Miller died. There was a woman who was breastfeeding such a tiny little baby. The water had run out for his mother to drink. He suckled at her breast, but his mother no longer had milk. The baby died, but his mother continued holding him in her arms. Did she go mad? In a station, she was hauled away with a cold baby in her arms. While traveling in Russia, the train stopped at the large stations for long, long periods of time. Bread was given there. Some people had taken extra clothing which they exchanged for food, but we didn't have extra clothing. Our train traveled for a very long time. It stopped, probably before the Urals. Everyone who was able to got out of the train car. Not far away was a stream with flowing water. Everyone wanted to get to the water at once. Most drank water while others washed themselves. People were stunned and confused by the heat. Sadly, they mixed and muddied the water, so that in the end there was only mud. It was a horrible sight.
The war has begun.
As we were moving east in Russian territory, occasionally our train stopped and waited for trains heading west to pass. Finally, our train stopped at a station, and we were told to leave it quickly. The other trains were carrying tanks and cannons, surrounded by soldiers with somber faces. They were going to the front lines. The war had started.
Our journey continues.
We were plagued by thirst and hunger and lice, such crawling things I had never seen before. Mother taught me to search in the seams of my shirt, in my armpits, and in other places. I helped my sister and brother search as well. The train had reached Krasnoyarsk, a Siberian city on the banks of the Yenisei River. Some train cars were uncoupled here, but we were taken farther. Zaziorny and other stations followed. We were ordered to leave the train at the Kansk station on the banks of the Kan River. We stood in groups as we got out of the train cars and waited for our fate. The local strongmen came and chose workers from the groups. We were in the last group. We were finally picked by the boss of the sawmill. We were hauled by train, then by horses to a small village, and the traveling stopped. At first we were placed in a community center, but we were then split up into the homes of the families of local residents.